And now we tackle the enormous responsibility of teaching you how to draw hair. Hair is difficult to teach because there's so many different kinds of hair. Your hair could be long, medium, short, or even bald, straight, wavy, curly, or in ringlets. Some people have bangs. Some people part their hair down the middle or down the side. Some people have big volume. Other hair lies flat on the head. Some people's hair is wet or frizzy. Some people's hair is organized or straight out of bed. Some people pull their hair back, and some people cover it up entirely. Ladies and gents, it's wonderful to see those smiling faces. Today we're back at it with 2 portraits this time. We want to learn how to draw hair. And I think a good first step for doing that is to put my drawings away and look at a photograph. Now, when we draw hair, I typically like to look at 3 zones. Number 1 is the front of the head. Number 2 is the back of the head. And number 3 is the sides of the head. What is the hair doing in each of those places? In the case of a ponytail, from the hairline, all the hair is just getting pulled back. On the top of the head, in most cases we don't see it, but in this case we do see the ponytail actually sticking up off the top. And on the sides of a head with a ponytail, the hair is simply being pulled back towards the back towards the scrunchie. What about something like this where we've got a weave? Again, let's look at the front, the top, and the 2 sides. In the front, all the hair is being pulled to the side. On the top, all the hair is being pulled to that same side. On the sides, all the hair goes down. What about this bob? The front has this wonderful swoosh. The top also has that swoosh. And on the sides, we see lots of curly swooshes. Well, on this side, maybe a little less. What about this long, flowy hair? Notice at the front, we see that it's parted, and from the hairline, the hair comes up and out. At the top, we don't see it on this photo, but that part still goes all the way to the top, and the hair still pulls out from that part. On the sides, we see these undulating waves that go all the way down past the shoulders. This dude has similar hair to that last lady, except the part is on the side. So from the front of the head, above the hairline, the hair pulls to the side from this part, but notice that it hangs down and covers a little bit of the forehead on one side. The other side, not so much. At the top, again, it pulls to the sides from both sides of the part. Still looking at this part. And on the sides of the head, just like in that last lady that we looked at, we see these wavy, curly, swooshy shapes. They're just not quite as long. What about this young gentleman here? Notice that from his hairline, some of his hair hangs down. These are what we call bangs. At the top of his head, his hair's got a little bit of messy flyaways. And on the sides, mostly smooth, flat on the head. So going back to my 2 drawings here, I need to figure out what kinds of hairstyles I want these guys to have. There are literally infinite different ways of drawing different hairstyles, but I've chosen 2 here that I think will demonstrate most of the concepts you need to know in order to draw your own hair. And what I really want you to see first, before I actually dive in and draw these, is the placement. So when I say the front of the head, the hairline is the front of the head. When we talk about what your hair is doing in the front, if it was bangs, it would come down from the hairline. If it's a flattened or straightened hairline like this, then it's just going to be changing the shape of that hairline. Instead of a curve, it's straight across. And if hair is being pulled back from the hairline, then you would just see a nice smooth hairline, and all the hair would be pulled back from it. When I say the sides of the head, we're talking about where this area between the hairline and the cranium and the ear. And in this case, it's all very smooth and flat. In this case, it's all being pulled behind the ears. And when I say the top of the head, I'm talking about the top of the cranium. What's the top of the hairstyle look like? In this case, it's going to be flattened off. Now notice that none of it is below the cranium. This is where the cranium circle ends. All of the hair is going to be above that. In fact, it should probably be a little higher because some of that hair is going to stick up off the top of the head. So I'm actually going to lift this up just a hair to about here. So a little bit higher than the cranium circle. That gives it a bit of volume. And going with that same thought here, you can see that the cranium circle ends here, but the hair ends here. There's a bit of space there because hair has some thickness to it that will make it sort of cover the scalp in more of a thick way. It's not just like flat on the top of the head. Depending on what kind of hair you're drawing, you might need more. Like if I was drawing an afro, it would be way out here. But that all depends on what kind of hair you're drawing. So drawing this from scratch, the first thing that I want to do is figure out where the front of the hair is going to look like. And the way I've done that for this is figured out where the part is. And notice that there's a sort of inverted V shape here coming out of the part, and which way, and I got to think about which way the hair is going, because it's from the front, it's just swooshing across the forehead and being pulled behind the ear. And I got to think about the fact that gravity is going to pull it down a little, but then the tightness of the braid behind is also going to pull it back a little, so it kind of hangs down a little in the front. And then gets pulled behind the ear. And then the same thing here, gravity pulls it down a little, but then the tightness of the braid is going to pull it back behind the ear. And so it's got this nice smooth curve to it. And that's what the hair on the front of the head is doing. The hair on the top of the head, up here where the cranium is, again, coming from this part, we've got this sort of inverted V shape. And from each side of that, again, I got to think about how gravity is going to pull it down, but the braid is going to pull it closer to the head. Now, I don't want it to be on this cranium line. I want to give it some volume, give it some thickness. And again, it's being pulled back behind the ear. On the top of the head, again, giving it a little bit of volume, a little bit of thickness away from the cranium. And in this case, her hair is nice and neat and organized. It's all, in place. Most people have a very hard time actually achieving this in real life. Most times we see some flyaways, or we see some, little hair that straggle. We call them stragglers in my house. The hair that doesn't quite go where you want it to go. But you can draw those things if you want, or you could choose not to. For example, a lot of times when you've got hair pulled back behind the ear, you might see like a little strand that comes down from in front of the ear and kind of covers a little bit of the ear here. or you might have a little strand from the part that kind of hangs down in front of the face. But what I've done here is I've started with just some basic shapes. I'll come back and add some shading later, but I want to move on and think about, from the sides of the head, what does the hair do? The reason it's being pulled back behind the ears here, if that's all we see, it kind of looks just like it's a short hairstyle, you know. And then some ladies do have short hair, but in this case I'm drawing a lady with long hair. And how do I make sure the viewer, the person looking at the picture, is aware of that? If I don't draw this braid down here, then this is just going to look like a short haircut. But if I come down and I think about how this braid is going to be shaped, then that's going to give more information to the viewer to see that this is not short hair, it's hair being pulled back to the back of the head. So the first thing I want to do, I've already sort of laid out very lightly where that braid is going to go. And I want to erase everything that I have drawn under that area, all the shading, all of the collar of the shirt, everything that's going to be covered up. And then I got to think about the actual shape of the braid. Now, when you draw a braid, I'm going to show you on the back here. When you draw a braid, what I do is I start with my sort of guides that show where it's going to be. And then you're going to have these alternating back and forth, almost making like the letter Y. If you look real close here, like this kind of looks like a Y, but longer. And they just keep alternating back and forth in different directions. And then the space between, like on each side, these should be curved where it looks like each one of these is wrapping around the one under it. And so you give it a little bit of overlapping that way. So it's an easy way to draw a braid. And so I'm going to do that here. I guess maybe I don't know. I usually start at the top, but with the way this is overlapping behind the neck, I think I'll start in the middle, just to give myself a bit more leeway on overlapping. Sketch these in lightly first before I darken these lines. Yeah. And then as it curves back behind the neck, I'm not going to see the whole thing. All right, so I've got the basic placement of all of those different parts of the braid. Now it's time to formalize and finalize. Make each one of these look like it's part of that braid wrapping around the whole thing. And I'll erase those guides that I made. So for this Sarge hairstyle, first thing I want to consider is the front of the head. And what I've done here is changed the shape of the hairline, made it straighter, but notice that I'm using sort of bumpy curly Q line. I'm not using just a straight line. And that's because this individual, this gentleman that I'm drawing here, might have very curly hair. Close cropped hair that is extremely curly. Now, for this top part, right at the hairline, it's going to be the same curly hairstyle, but then below that, as we move down to the sides of the head, the hair here is much more closely cropped, to the point where it's almost completely shaved. And because of that, it's going to be much smoother. And A lot of people get these lines when above their ears when they shave that section. A lot of people get these rows that go across towards the back of the head, around the back of the head, and so I've kind of given an indication of that. And what I don't want to do, like up here, I made this nice dark line. I don't want to make this line too terribly dark, because it's gonna, if it's that closely cropped, it's going to blend more smoothly into the shading of the skin. But maybe around the top of that, where it meets the slightly longer but still short curly hair, we're going to see a nice bumpy line there. A nice dark line too. As we move up to the top of the head, notice that this comes kind of straight up. Oh, you can barely see it. There we go. It comes kind of straight up. But again, it's this bumpy, curly line. And when it reaches the top, notice that I've given it some space between the top of the cranium and the top of the hairstyle, because the hair may be sticking up a bit. And I'm going to use this bumpy kind of line to give that indication that it is curly hair. Now, again, I'm going to erase the guides that I made for myself, and now it's time to start shading. We got to keep in mind a consistent light source. We've talked about that for everything. Here, the top right is where the light is shining, and that means that there's going to be a highlighted area up at the top right, and it's going to be darker on the left. But when we shade hair, we're going to try to shade each clump or each shape together as one. So I'll start with this shape. And I always want my shading to go the direction that the hair is being pulled. So the hair is being pulled from that part down behind the ear. So I'm always moving my pencil in the same direction as that hair is flowing. And it's going to be light up here, pretty much all the way across the top, right at just beside the part. Now at the part, I'm going to darken it just a little bit so that the highlight is actually not at the part, because it's going to be darker where it curves in and connects. But then here's going to be the highlight, and then it's going to be darker down here at the bottom. In this case, if you look at the eyebrows, I've already given this lady dark hair. So I need to do the same here, but I'm still going to leave a nice bright highlight even though she's got dark hair, because hair has some shine to it. So I'm going to make this hair nice and dark. But notice that as I shade it, I'm using the tip of my pencil instead of the side of my pencil like I did for everything else. Everything else, I was holding my pencil sideways and shading with the side of the pencil so that I could get nice, soft, smooth shading. But here, I want it to look like lines, because that is what hair looks like. So I'm using the tip of the pencil, and that just gives a different texture. And I'm kind of shading it in zones. I've got the darkest zone at the bottom, and then I'm going to have a slightly lighter zone as it gets close to the highlight. And then again, up at the top, I've got this really dark zone at the part, and then I'm going to have a slightly lighter zone between that and the highlight. So it's not just like black and white. There's a little bit of a gradation there between the darkest darks and the lightest lights. Now, so I've got that bright white highlight. Remember, the shinier things are, the more feminine they look, so bright, bright, bright highlights definitely help. And then I'm just going to push the darkness, because I want that to look like it's black hair. I'm just going to push these shadows really super dark And same right here, push that shadow really super dark. Okay, so following that same pattern, I also need to shade this area with the highlight being, again, right about here. And then the darkest patch over here, okay? When I shade the braid, these parts back behind the neck are gonna be like almost completely black. I might not even see these lines between the different parts of the braid anymore. But as we get down in front, we got to think that there's going to be light shining. So each one of these little sections of the braid is going to have a highlight on its own. And each one of those sections I'm going to shade by itself. And on these, the highlights might be on this side. On these, the highlight might be on that side. Now with curly hair, we need to shade it a little differently because each curl is going to have its own highlights and shadows. So there's going to be highlights and shadows throughout this whole dad burn thing. But we need to consider that there is a consistent light source coming in from the top right. So this area up here is going to be lighter. I'm not going to make it a bright, shiny highlight like I did with my lady, because it's not a smooth, shiny surface of hair. Also because it's a dude. And remember, the shinier things are, the more feminine they look. But what I want to do, since it's curly hair, I want to shade. It's not really shading, it's closer to hatching or cross-hatching than it is to shading, because I'm using these little scribbles, these little circles, instead of actually, you know, shading. But again, just like I did with the other, when I'm doing hair, I'm using the point of my pencil. And notice that as I make these tight little curly-Q circle-y things, there's little white spaces between them that give the indication that there's highlights on every single one of those curls. But notice that I want these curls to be lighter up here at the top, on the top right, where the light is shining. And that's kind of going to be across, you know, half of the top of the head here. And then they're going to steadily get darker as they come down and in. Now, I'll show the rest of that in time lapse, but I want to talk about this area here. This is where the hair is so closely shaved that you can barely see any stubble. It's just going to be like little dots. And so I'm going to draw that as little dots, but then I'm also going to have to shade it appropriately to the skin tone. Now, you can see here that I got a little too quick with my dots and some of them became lines. Try to avoid that. Try to be slow and careful with your dots if you're doing this, and that way you don't end up with little lines. Now, the light is shining on this side. I'm going to put just a little bit of a shadow right at the edge of the head there. Blend that a bit. Also, you know, just this whole general hair area is going to be a little bit darker than the skin tone. So I will darken this whole zone just ever so slightly. But I don't necessarily need a line outlining it. So I'm actually going to go back and erase that line and just let the value of the shading be what makes it stand apart from the skin around it. Now I'm going to go back and finish both of these in time lapse and let you see how they look, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more at the very end just to see if there's anything else I think we need to touch and talk about. Wow, just wow. Okay, I have to say, that going through this process myself, just making these videos to teach this, I have learned a lot and I have improved a lot. And I'll show you some pictures of portraits I drew like years and years ago, and then some more recent portraits, and then these ones. And you can see the growth that I have found just from going through this process again. Before I end this video, I want to talk briefly about just a few little pointers that I thought about while I was doing these last little details here on the hair. For my gentleman here, one of the things you noticed was that I kept turning the paper at an angle, and I found the reason I did that is because I found that as I was doing the little curlicues, I was making little C shapes instead of little loops. I was making them C's, and I wanted the open end of the C to be on the edge that was highlighted so that it would emphasize that direction of the light again. And also the areas here on the sides that are like really shaved, I went back and shaded kind of like the values of the side of the head here, just a little bit darker than the skin around it. And with the lady, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was how a lot of these, I was shading with my pencil move in this direction, but also in a lot of cases I was really making long swooping lines, and I was trying to make sure, like, I didn't want little small movements with my pencil. I wanted nice long sweeping lines to give the the effect that it's long swooshing hair. And down here in the braid, this part that wraps around behind the neck, because the neck is going to cast a shadow on it, is really, really dark. I did leave a slightly highlighted area, so the hair itself is really dark, but each section has its own little bit of a slightly lighter value. Whereas down here where the light would actually be shining on it, each individual one of those sections of the braid has its own highlight. And wow, I'm really happy with the way these turned out. And there's one other thing I totally forgot to do, but I have to do, and that is sign my name. If you have followed along with this whole process, thank you for watching these videos. If you learned something from them, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And once again, I'm just gonna show some before and after, showing my own growth as a portrait artist over the last several years.